This is a president who sees auto tariffs as a tool to reshape American manufacturing and maybe even American society as a whole by bringing back lost jobs. John Deere responded quickly after former President Donald Trump said earlier this week that he would place a 200% tariff on the company if it moved production to Mexico. It was meant to be a comeback story. Factories would run again. Jobs would return to American soil. Trump promised that companies like Ford and John Deere would remain loyal and that American industry would rise again. His rallies were full of hope, the hope of rebuilding what globalization had broken. But that dream didn't just fade, it was left behind. Ford expanded overseas, John Deere moved production abroad, and Trump lost control. His threats started to sound desperate. The tariffs didn't work. The crowd that once cheered began to ask tough questions. In towns built on steel and farming, people are waking up to a painful truth. The manufacturing revival Trump had promised isn't just delayed, it's over. Now American farmers feel let down, factory workers feel forgotten, and in the heartland, what used to be loyalty is turning into frustration. This fight was never just about jobs. It's about trust, survival, and identity. Did Trump let down American workers? Did big companies ever truly plan to stay? Was the Made in America dream always just a fantasy? What's happening now is complicated. John Deere's decision to grow overseas wasn't meant as an act of rebellion, it was a move to survive. The company had been slowly changing its production plans, not to run from America, but to stay competitive in a tough global market. Trump made it sound like betrayal, but Deere's expansion was the result of years of changing policies, rising costs, and global pressures that had been building long before the idea of tariffs came up. When Trump announced the new tariffs, John Deere was already deeply invested in its global expansion. It had committed to building new factories in Brazil and India, adding high-tech automation in Europe, and expanding research in Asia. Trump's threats didn't scare the company. If anything, they showed that Deere had made the right decision. Betting everything on American manufacturing in such a shaky environment would have been risky. This wasn't the first time that business decisions clashed with political promises, but it was one of the most obvious. Deere's leaders weren't interested in drama or symbolic loyalty. Their focus was on staying competitive, keeping shareholders happy, and making sure the company lasted long-term. Trump may have believed he could pressure John Deere into changing its plans, but all he did was show how little power Washington has over global companies. And while Trump's battle with Deere heated up, Ford was getting ready to make a move of its own. If you haven't heard yet, stick around and subscribe. While Trump spent months attacking foreign governments and warning about tariffs on China, Ford quietly made a decision that could hurt even more. It started shifting key production away from the U.S. Unlike Deere, Ford didn't hold a press conference or try to make headlines. It just moved. Ford's slow, quiet departure was a lesson in strategic silence. It grew its electric vehicle production in Mexico, built new partnerships in Vietnam, and reduced spending on U.S. plants, all without creating a scene. Ford didn't need loud speeches. It let its actions speak, and those actions said a lot. This wasn't about politics, it was about numbers. The costs of labor, materials, and regulations made it almost impossible for Ford to keep building cars fully in America and still compete. Just like Deere, Ford was focused on staying alive in a world where every dollar and second counts. Trump had spent years calling himself Detroit's hero, the one who would bring auto jobs back with a roar. But Ford's exit hit hard. It didn't just damage Trump's message. It shook the whole idea of America's manufacturing comeback. When Ford left, a part of America's identity left with it. And what stung more than China or any foreign rival was the deeper meaning. This wasn't some attack from far away. It was a quiet shift from within. And it made Trump look less like a tough leader and more like someone shouting without being heard. The corporate exodus didn't stop there. Deere and Ford proved it was possible to stand up to Washington without paying a price. Other companies saw that and followed. A new test of loyalty had been set, and Trump didn't pass. He thought American businesses, like American voters, could be pushed into line with loyalty speeches, public shaming, and the threat of penalties. But that plan failed because it ignored economic reality. Deere and Ford were expected to stay true to Trump's vision. That was the unspoken deal. Trump had supported them, praised them, and tied his image to their success. In return, he thought they would obey. But when it came down to it, they picked freedom over following orders. And once that illusion was broken, others started to break free too. General Motors looked to South Korea for new production lines. Caterpillar increased operations in India. Whirlpool quietly shifted work to Poland. A new chapter had begun, one where the president's opinion no longer controlled business decisions. Trump's failure wasn't just about his policies, it was about how he saw things. He believed corporations would act like campaign teammates, but they acted like what they really are, survivors in a harsh, fast-moving global economy. The loyalty test exposed more than Trump wanted. It showed that the U.S. no longer holds the same economic pull it once did. It showed that no amount of threats or shouting can stop the powerful pull of globalization. And it showed that even in the heartland, where Trump once found his strongest support, the old belief in corporate patriotism is fading. As Deere and Ford moved on, the message was clear. The American economy isn't waiting for anyone to catch up. The future won't be a repeat of the past. It's moving into something newer and less certain. And for Trump, the fallout is just beginning. When Donald Trump landed in Iowa for what should have been a big victory rally, the energy was high, the stands were full, flags flew. Supporters who had stood in line for hours waited to hear his usual fiery speech, talk of protecting the border, punishing China, and bringing jobs home. But what they got instead was a political shock. A 200% tariff on John Deere products made outside the U.S. and a 25% tariff on all imported Ford vehicles. What was framed as a bold move against outsourcing created sudden concern. This wasn't some distant issue about foreign labor or corporate greed. This was real, personal. Iowa is Deere territory. It's also Ford territory. These aren't just company names, they're lifelines. Farms depend on Deere equipment. Towns rely on Ford for jobs, transportation, and identity. When Trump turned on those companies, it felt like he was turning on the people who rely on them too. For many at that rally, it felt like a betrayal. And as they slowly left the stadium, the cheers died down quicker than usual. Conversations became uneasy. Some people were doing the math. Others called home to talk about tractor orders, car payments, or loan terms. In diners and truck stops across Iowa that week, the mood changed. Farmers who had once seen Trump as their last hope against globalization began asking hard questions. Could they afford a president who just raised the cost of their tractors by 30%? Could they keep backing someone who just made their harvest season more expensive? The belief that Trump and Middle America were completely in sync cracked that night, and once that bond cracked, everything else began to shift. While this change spread across small towns, another kind of storm was forming in corporate boardrooms. Ford and Deere didn't panic. Trump thought he had surprised two of America's biggest companies. He hadn't. Inside Ford and Deere's offices, teams had already been preparing for months. They had run through every scenario: sudden tariff hikes, calls for boycotts, media chaos, and even tweets from the president. This wasn't a crisis for them. It was a chess game. And they were already 10 moves ahead. Ford had already started changing its supply chains overseas. It had increased investment in Mexico and Southeast Asia. Deere had secured tax breaks abroad and new shipping plans through Brazil and India. Both companies had full teams focused on watching Trump's words, speaking to Congress, and managing the media. They didn't just expect this conflict, they planned for it.